ran over. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Clerk, will you call the roll?
Agent, Clegg,
Here.
Halliburton,
Here.
Sanchez,
Here.
Thompson,
Here.
Woodings.
Here.
5 present, 1 absent.
Thanks. First up, we have Karen Gallagher. Is Ellen, are you here for this as well? Great. To discuss the old Boise blocks, Grove Street design.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council. Yes, so Ellen's with me, so we'll work through this. This is definitely a work session item. Today, we'd like to go over a project overview and background that Ellen will provide, the schematic design, and then we're going to go through some options and trade-offs. And what we'd like is to get direction from the mayor and council. With that direction, we would like to then come back in August. We've got quite a few items that are interacting. So with your feedback, we can go back and come up with a final design and bring that back. So with that, Mayor?
Hearing a funny beep, but go ahead.
Great. Yeah, so at the last part of this, we're definitely looking for the feedback. Ellen and I will kind of tag team that to give you the full perspective on those trade-offs. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Ellen for the overview and background.
Thank you, Karen. Thanks, Mayor and Council. It's great to be here with you and members of the public and our whole project team. I think that one of our lead landscape architects from ZGF is zooming in, but I'm not positive if she's in the link. So
And who is that, Ellen?
Her name is Debbie Chow, and she would probably be able to answer some questions from council if she's
Great.
linked in.
Char, will you just let us know if Debbie's here? And Debbie, I'm getting nods from folks. So if you're here once, you can raise your hand when you're ready to speak yourself, or staff council will know to ask you questions too.
Madam Mayor, she's actually a panelist. So she's already online.
Oh, great. Okay.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Okay, so here is a cool view.
Ellen, sorry, just a second.
Oop,
Could you tilt the microphone
Yes.
up
thanks for the
just a bit?
feedback.
Just,
Wait.
thank you, so that you're speaking into it. Thank you.
Is this fine? Great. Okay. Thank you for asking about that. So this is a cool view of Grove Street, standing kind of or looking from 3rd towards 6th, which is essentially the project area. You'll note the blue and red building is the CW Moore Apartments. You can kind of see in the middle distance. There's also some other housing there on the near corner near 3rd. But you can also tell that this is the street before some of the substantial redevelopment has started occurring, which I'll be talking about here in a second. A super simple project schedule. We are about, I would say, like 1.5 years into this project. There was an extensive, and I would like to think, I'm biased, exemplary kind of visioning process to establish the design principles. And so now where we're at is kind of most of the way, or a good chunk of the way, through the streetscape design, bringing this to mayor and council for, as Karen said, your feedback and direction. I'm going to quickly walk through some of the more notable elements on the street, just as by way of orientation. So this is kind of an axon view of the blocks. And for reference, this is the Basque block between Capitol and 6th on Grove. And the project area is this yellow area. So focusing on 6th to 3rd. That blue arrow that just showed up is the Boise City Canal that runs under the north side of the street and is a factor in planning, and also kind of a potential placemaking element that was identified early on in this process. These two kind of marigold colored chunks are some existing housing that I pointed out on the aerial photo and are not proposed to change or have any hope for impact other than improvements through this project. The light blue area you're seeing here are all parcels that are in some degree of what I would characterize as active conversations about what might happen in the seems like near future. I'm really hedging here because there's a lot of unknowns about what will happen with those parcels, all of which I think would at some point come before mayor and council and to the city before they're developed. But I think it's just notable that already the interest in this area seems to be correlating with like active redevelopment conversations. And then of course the pink buildings are ones that are in construction. The very light, excuse me, very light blue parcels, so the triangle parcel and then the Department of Labor parking lot. I'm just pointing out to say there are no, that I know of, like very active or explicit conversations that are going to lead those parcels to be redeveloped in the foreseeable future at this point. So we just are characterizing those in a slightly different way than the other parcels. So that's to give you a sense of where activity could be occurring in the near term on the street. Last but not least, of course, is the existing C.W. Moore Park. And then there are, and Karen will talk about this a little bit more, some more mature trees along the south side of the street, which some or all of which could be maintained depending on the design option that moves forward. So that's a real quick overview, and I hope a very helpful one of the basics of what's here in the area. And what I'm going to talk about, hopefully pretty quickly, is again trying to condense about 1.5 years of work and probably hundreds of hours of folks like yourselves and Karen and many others on kind of the salient points of how we got to where we are today. So first, one extremely cool thing I think that happened in this process is that along with the city's Arts and History Department, a professional historical research firm was engaged by CCDC to dig into the history specifically on these blocks. And you can see their simplified conclusion of some of the main characteristics of this street over time. And the bottom text is kind of where we landed in consultation with the public and a working group about what should we be doing, how should we take this information about the history of the area and utilize it in bringing forward the history of working class, immigrants, all of the themes that you're seeing there, and really build it into and around the street. So, and I think I just want to emphasize that part of what was cool is that, and I'll show this on this slide maybe a little bit, these are some census snapshots that were uncovered. And if you could zoom in and read old-timey script, you really start to see that people from China, from Japan, from Spain, from Greece, from Basque Country, from all over the world came to this place and helped create it. And they're still doing that. And I think that's a really important part of the story that we can tell in this place. I'll keep moving. So this is a timeline highlighting the different kinds of stakeholder engagement that happened through the visioning process last year. I just want to note that, as we're all aware, we had to kind of switch into a virtual mode. And so I think that some of the opportunities to meet on the street with people using the street really were not able to happen in the way that we had hoped. But in spite of that, we had almost 1,000 people engaged through the survey, maybe more than that, and the work group and through interviews, which I think is pretty decent input given those limitations and the fact that it's kind of a 3-block area. So this slide summarizes 4 main points that really were quite consistent through all of that outreach and in consultation with what I think of as like technical experts, so more like various departments of the city and public agencies. So a lot of emphasis on 4 things. The canal and the history of the canal is important. It's in this area. People would love to see some way of incorporating it into the street. So lots of options there. A lot of emphasis all around on bicycle and pedestrian zones being incorporated. Again, the history and culture, which I already mentioned. And then the 4th big emphasis would be to design with ecological focus. Here is one example of some of the things that we heard from the public during the design phase of this project where we asked about raised bike lanes. I did want to comment that the bike lane question going in, we did want to know the public's input, but we also understand that there are technical experts who, need to be weighing in on this question. So we wanted to see if we could come up with options that would allow all of those perspectives and expertise to kind of win out in the street. About as far as the vision goes, I just do want to point out, because sometimes I think public agencies feel like they're on the hook to do every single thing that we put into a vision. And the fact is that it really, part of the point of the process was to interest and engage and activate people beyond the public agency realm. So of course, property owners and developers, but also just neighborhood, citizen, community-based organizations. And I think that to some extent, we're seeing some traction in that area, which is great. I won't go through all the plans and initiatives. Maybe the most important thing to point out here is that this section of Grove Street is designated as a bike boulevard in the roadways to bikeways plan. So we tried to be true to that. And hot off the presses somewhat is the climate action roadmap for Boise. So we do hope that the design is consistent with those principles. So that'll be for mayor and council to decide. And finally, road design, as you all well know, is a balancing act. And so this is just some of the priorities that we endeavored as a team to balance within the design on the street. With that, I just have a few more slides to get into the actual proposed design. So this is what I would call typical cross section of the proposed streetscape design. There's some variation among the blocks, of course, but what you see here is some real wide sidewalk space. Excuse me. So it's about 18 feet. And for comparison, and I'll have a slide on this in a second, the Basque block, where there's cafes and sidewalk space, is about 15. So it's a little bit wider than that. And you can kind of think of walking down the Basque block, maybe past the Basque Market, and what that feels like. There's an area for street furnishings and trees. And also on the north side, the opportunity to take advantage of the canal underground to incorporate a water feature that could double as seating and utilize some sandstone elements that would be like local stone to this area. Then there is a separated bike lane that's on sidewalk grade and some rolled curb to be consistent with the Basque block design. And then the travel lanes and the whole street is designed symmetrically, so it's balanced on both sides. Here's a photo, or here's a rendering of, kind of a bland, maybe not very Boise-esque rendering, but nonetheless a rendering of how this might play out if you were walking down the street on an everyday. And then, of course, the street is also intended, at least part of it, from 6th to C.W. Moore Park to be able to act as an event space. And part of why that's part of the design is we heard from folks that use the Basque block, including folks on the Basque block, that it's a little tight in there. We're growing and it's a popular area to have events. And so they were looking for, how do we kind of expand the Basque block and also create not just long space, but wider, a little bit wider, more usable and flexible space. So this is what it could look like used for events. I'm almost done here. So here's the Basque block and its sidewalks and its travel lanes, which it is a one-way street. And then some parking on the south side. You can see also that blue circle is the existing canal. And so compared to the Basque block, the old Boise blocks today have a narrower sidewalk and same amount of travel lane and then parking on both sides. So that's just like for your reference. Taking that same old Boise blocks today and moving forward into how does the street kind of balance these uses? What's proposed again is to widen that sidewalk space to allow both pedestrian circulation and activity, market types of activity is how I think of it. Maybe it's street cafes, maybe it's trade tables, maybe it's some other kind of street storefront activation. And then the travel lanes and then these bike lanes. So really in a way, the parking in the current design is being repurposed for bikes and pedestrians according to what was articulated, in the original vision. Now, of course, we imagine parking would be needed, or at least delivery and loading drop off. And so there is room for, in the current design, these little little parking pockets along the street. And there'll be a plan view here in a second. There you go. And what this is trying to show, sorry, ignore all the dots. That stuff got moved around very, I don't know, maybe it's fine. But anyway, what I want you guys to focus on is that in the middle of the street, the pink are the proposed parking pockets that can accommodate deliveries and drop-offs, especially because, as Karen will point out, there's not really an alley on the south side of this between Grove and Front. And then the green stripe that you see along the street is a continuous bike lane. And one thing I personally think is cool as someone who bikes around downtown, especially with kids, is you can navigate this parking without having to run into the back of a UPS truck, right? Because it's going around the pull-in spaces. So anyway, so with that, the last thing I'll just mention is this is a, rendering of a potential proposed water feature and how that might fit in on the north side with the trees. It's also kind of illustrating what you see in the foreground is the separated bike lane, then these kind of water features, street furnishing, trees, sidewalk, circulation space for pedestrians, and then that activation space in front of the buildings. I won't belabor this, but this is just another cool picture of showing the event space. So thanks for letting me walk through all that. And I'm going to turn it over to Karen, unless there's any questions at the moment to clarify what I just shared. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ellen, I do have a couple of questions. So as I did some research about festival blocks, frankly, I didn't find any that were longer than 2 blocks. And we're proposing to do the same treatment for a full 4 blocks. We're doing it in an area where we know we have some existing residential that's not going to redevelop. So I'm curious about the thinking behind that and why you'd want to do the same street profile in those full 4 blocks.
Madam Mayor and Council President Clegg, thank you for that question. And it's a really, really good and fair one. And I think the actual length of the proposed kind of festival use is really 1 block plus CW Moore Park. So I don't know if I can quickly kind of go back.
But Ellen,
Oh,
where
yeah.
was that stage? Which intersection was
So
that stage?
that,
at?
yep, that could have been, I believe that, I think that was looking at 6th, this one. Yeah, this one is from the intersection of 6th, or it could be set up at 5th. But the intersections would be used for a larger structure like this.
Okay.
Okay. Mostly at 6th. Okay. And the only reason it's really extending into the park space is, again, what we heard was sometimes that long space that can't widen is not as useful. But even if it just stayed within the street, it would still accommodate 10-foot tents between the trees is the way it's designed. So it's about a block. Yeah.
Okay, so second question, today on the Basque Block, we do have parking on the one side of the street. And so the street profile itself is quite a bit wider than what you're proposing in these blocks. And I guess it's my experience with festival blocks that most of the activity happens in the street. It doesn't happen on the sidewalk. So did you think about on that second block between 5th and 6th, continuing to allow parking on the south side? We know what the north side is redeveloping as. We know it needs that cafe space and some of that. But the south side isn't developed yet. And as it develops, certainly whatever gets designed there can design into whatever we put there. And I guess I asked that because then you'd have a wider streetscape footprint to actually have the festival in rather than trying to move it onto the sidewalks.
Mhm. Thanks for that question, Madam Mayor and Council President. I think this would be a good place, I think, for Debbie and Kim maybe to chime in if Debbie's able to, because Debbie has spent a lot of time really thinking about the geometry of the street very, very deeply. I don't know if she.
I am available.
Oh, great. Yeah. Debbie,
Hi.
address that question.
So, so the street right now it's pretty intimate. I think, you have an absolute, correct way of imagining that, a lot of the activities actually happen within the street level. But then, what we have observed too is the sidewalk area are where people would gather and sit down and eat or and move through the space. So in many ways, the activities is like within the whole entire street right of way of the 80 feet. While the activities may be in the middle, we do see, there are advantages and disadvantages of having, a wider, roadway bed. And what we're trying to do too is balance the right of way to pedestrians and bicycle, and perhaps, less to the vehicles. And that's our intent.
Mhm. If I just can jump back in, I think this bottom illustration shows if you add that parking back in, it does, decrease the pedestrian zone, and then it just squeezes that side of the street and creates asymmetry in the street. So it's totally, possible to do that. But I think to me, and I guess what we are hearing from the folks that we talked to is they wanted a balanced street where most of that space really is allowed for pedestrians and activation. And I guess thinking about when you walk through Capitol Market, let's say, it does feel tight when you don't leave that pedestrian circulation space, I think, ample enough among the tents and other uses, but it's an option.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and it seems to me that it would be something to bring up again when the time is right, or with CCDC sooner rather than later, as they're figuring out how to sequence the investments and timing and everything.
Okay. Good. Okay.
Thanks, Ellen.
So walking through maybe a little bit more of the details and specifics of some of the trade-offs. So there's 3 topics we want to talk about: is the mature trees and some trade-offs there, on-street parking, delivery trade-offs, and then if you wanted to give us any feedback on the water feature at this time. So specifically, Ellen showed you on the other previous slide that we've got some mature trees here. Starting from 3rd Street, there's an elm and sycamore over here, and then some newly planted honey locusts. So in all options, these are maintained. We've got some Norway maples that are mature trees here that are in a planter that's lawn. And they have about 40 more years of life in them, of giving back a bunch of, I've got another list of the benefits that they give us, but I just want to give you a perspective of where they are. And then there's one tree here on the south side that, depending on the design, if we can incorporate this one, great. If not, it would be an okay trade-off for the improvements that we would get on that side of the street. So we're mostly focusing the question on the trees on the south side of Grove here. in front of the CW Moore office building. And so with the trees, do we want to retain the Norway maples? As Ellen said, right now, with the feedback they've been given, they have designed a beautiful symmetrical street. So most of the items that we're bringing up would change that symmetry to asymmetrical. So the existing trees, they do provide existing shade for pedestrians. We've got environmental benefits and climate on both the oxygen that they produce, the helping with the storm drainage, or when it rains, the temperature, they retain the water on the leaves before they hit the ground. Even the lawn planter that they're in helps to absorb that water as well. And then for storm water runoff, all of that slows it so that it's not just heading into the street as if we have more of our urban scape that we do the silvacells with the concrete up to them, that's more impermeable surface. It's a longer life for the trees, but the existing setup has benefit for us. And we're trying to figure out, do we want to keep that now? And one of the trade-offs would be that we would be foregoing the silvacells at this time. So we would probably want to keep the trees and possibly the lawn for the life of those trees at 40 years. And then maybe we would have some other ways of helping trees along other than silvacells. We don't know at that point. But we did want to make sure that you know that this, it's difficult to get the silvacell arrangement probably later. So if that makes sense. Sure.
What, you probably said it, what side of the tree, side of the street are the trees?
They're on the south side here by the parking lot by the CW Moore office building.
Okay.
Okay.
Just a couple thoughts. My first inclination is that we ought to be looking at keeping those, just going back to the conversation we had about how hot that block down below Front and Myrtle, like in between Front and Myrtle is, with the new trees. And if we've got trees on the south side in the summer, that does that makes a difference for the block. And my sense is too. So I think we shouldn't take it off the table. And also, I mean, we've also seen over the years replacement of old trees with silvacells. So yes, it's not ideal because it's not at the exact same time. But if we have, the trees that we're going to get in there are not going to provide the shade that these trees provide right now, would be my first reaction to that.
So moving on from the trees, then wanted to talk a bit about existing land uses and the delivery.
It looks like Debbie, I'm sorry, Karen, I'm going to cut you off just because I
Sure.
saw Debbie
Okay.
raised her hand. And so Debbie, go ahead.
Actually, this is Brian McCarter. I'm a senior urban design advisor for ZGF. I think it's Debbie sent me the invite, so it's using her name, but apologies for that. I wanted to respond just to add a couple things here. I think one of the things not to lose sight of is in these three blocks. It's not a long streetscape by other standards that we've applied in Boise, like Broad or 8th or something like that. And I think there is power in placemaking by having a degree of design continuity for the three blocks. Yes, we anticipate the festival only really extending one more block east of the Bass block, but if you think of how we did Broad Street, we had one block there that's no parking, enhanced pavers, and that's really our festival block, but elements of the design of that block extend on to the east, and it modifies itself a little bit to incorporate existing trees here and there, but there's a real effort to provide unity, which I think is the power of the project of this investment at this time. One of the things about the trees is, yes, the mature trees are great. They're up and running. They've got years of growth on them. At the same time, because of root space, they're only going to be able to go so far. And with CCD's investment that's available now and is not going to be available probably when that parking lot redevelops, we may not see silvacells go back in on a development, a single individual development later. And so this is really the chance to get in the infrastructure to provide the future really robust urban canopy over the entire 3 blocks. So it's just something to keep in mind. Thank you.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, but Broad Street's the street I was talking about where I feel like I get on that block and I just want to run so fast to get into the coffee shop because it's so hot. And so, show us a solution that's affordable that, doesn't get people wanting to run into a store because it's so hot on that street. And we talked about that as with council at the last meeting, the width of that street, the lack of parking, how it just feels like it's this barren cement scape to be. Maybe 40 years from now, it'll feel different. We had high hopes for it, but it doesn't feel as we all hope that it would.
Madam Mayor, just to reemphasize what you're saying, I actually used to live in that neighborhood. I'm a little surprised that the basement apartment is still there. It's on the southeast corner of 4th and Grove. And yeah, that was my saving grace, was that I lived in a basement apartment. She's right. It's terribly hot in that part of the city. And anything we can do to preserve any sort of coolness would be great, especially for the folks who call that area home.
Madam Mayor. Thank you. And Brian, to your point about the Broad Street area, I agree that continuity of design is an important factor, but I think we can achieve that without having a design that's exactly the same in every block. And for me, I think that was the thing that I saw that I didn't quite understand because the land uses are not the same in every block. And while continuity of design is important to me, it's also important to recognize the existing land uses, especially the ones that are likely to stay for a while and honor them in some way. And
Could I just for a brief moment share a screen, because I think I agree. I think it might get to what we're talking about. If I can get this to share. Oh, I guess I can't share because of the.
no, you will.
Now I can.
Is he a panelist? Yeah, Brian, you're a panelist, so you should be able to share.
Okay, here, let me do it. To Councilperson Clegg's point, I think when I look at this block, and maybe this gets to the middle ground that I think we're seeking. This is the old housing that was on the south side of Broad, historic homes, and there was a whole grove, I believe, of ornamental pear trees there, and we chose to preserve all of them because we didn't see this land use changing. We kept the tree lawns, but you can see that we went ahead and rebuilt connecting sidewalks over to the parked cars. We went ahead and carried our pervious pavers in the parking zone into that zone. We went ahead and carried the unified concrete edge of the travel lanes. And so this side of the street is the new landscape. That side of the street was the existing one. But I think the two really, I think what I'm talking about is a degree of continuity, not absolute, soldier-like. Every block doesn't have to be identical, but there's enough threads of design elements that carry through that I think it can end up feeling, I think, very successful. And given another 10, 15 years, we're gonna have a very nice tree canopy over this street, because these are all silvocels here. The trees get a little benefit by growing in the tree lawn. They have more access to air and water because they're not paved over. So I think it's a good example of kind of a middle ground of what we're talking about. And we are currently thinking of ways to do the same thing on Grove Street. We just want to make sure that we carry enough of the continuity that it really unifies that as a special place in downtown Boise.
And Brian, will you move that Google Earth in the other direction so you're headed towards Trader Joe's?
Yeah.
So
yeah, here's the Plaza block, which I totally understand.
This is what I want an investment to avoid when we've got existing shade in, you know, when we're looking at Grove Street. This is what, you know, I see many people, you know, moving quickly in this. It's hot. Those trees, there's uniformity, yes, but the trees don't provide what that block needs with all that cement and hardscape that's been put in.
Totally agree. I think, you know, again, 10 or 15 years, this street's going to be quite different, but in the intervening time right now, there wasn't a lot of tree canopy on this block
Right.
originally. And so I think the net effect is going to be better in the future, but it's going to take some time to get a mature tree canopy there, for sure.
Yeah, and so if we could come up with a way to bridge the next 10 or 15 years that works from a design perspective, but also allows a temperature bridge, I think is our best day.
Sorry, I don't have my raise the hand emoji,
Go ahead.
but I wanted to add, I think the choice of planting columnar tree where they're very narrow without a canopy versus a large canopy tree, it's also going to affect, you know, what type of cooling and temperature that you get, you know, from whether you're going to run really fast, you know, across the street, or you're going to be able to get some shade, you know, underneath the tree. So I think we'll pay more attention to the type of tree, the type of canopy tree, whether it's large or medium size, you know, in the next projects that we'll be working on, and actually this project, because we're still in schematic design and not quite there yet. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, I have a comment kind of related to what Brian was pointing out with the different treatments on different blocks. Looking at this, I think having 3 blocks that are identical probably does not make sense. And so having some continuity, but treating each block a little bit differently, where we can retain some trees, we can have that big festival block that moves up to the Basque block, and that kind of becomes 2 festival blocks together. But then we have some transition going down that might be a little bit more natural. It might have more tree cover. It might not have those super wide sidewalks, but you know, have the same design elements that are down the way, I think really makes a lot of sense. But maybe for, you know, having 3 whole blocks that are identical and contiguous does not make as much sense to me.
And I think we're not really, it's hard to see in the plan view. We're not really proposing that kind of identical treatment. But one thing I guess to bear in mind when we talk about these wide sidewalks, we're trying to set the tree position in the cross section so that it'll take less years to canopy up and over the street. You know, that's the sidewalk. The wider the sidewalk is, the farther out the trees are going to be towards the center of the street, and the sooner that we can kind of create that really dense shade over the middle of the street. And some of Boise's fantastic streets in the north end are a great demonstration of that. Every time we introduce the parking pockets, we're going to be pushing those trees away from the center and creating a larger area of pavement in the center of the street that's hotter. It's got more heat island effect. So that's why our desire is, if we're going to introduce parking and loading, that we do it in isolated pockets and not full block lengths where we really begin to open up the pavement to all that heat gain and stuff. So there is a relationship with sidewalk width, where the trees sit in the cross section, and how soon we can get that environment that all of us want to have, where it's cool, it's inviting. There's enough trees out there that you really don't walk out into the sun very often. You're under a continuous canopy. And that's very much like some of the older streets in the north end and the east end, where you have those continuous big canopies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So moving on from there, I did want to talk about the existing land uses and loading delivery parking. So as you saw in the cross section, the two
We need
lanes.
the slides again, right?
Oh, thank you.
There we go.
Thank you. So just because part of what we're talking about here is that trade-off between the wider cafe market zone and if we want loading parking on the street. And so what we want to bring to the table is a discussion of the existing or future land uses, and do they connect with that, the need for a wider cafe space, or where are we on the functionality for having parking, loading, delivery? So just want to do a quick run through on this. And Mayor, I think even if we go 5 more minutes, I can make this
Okay, great.
the
Go ahead.
State Street one a little shorter.
Oh, yeah, you've
Okay.
got 5 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So here on the north side of Grove Street, 5th to 6th, that is under construction with active uses on the ground floor. On the other side of the street, we are anticipating redevelopment. They've one of the property owners that owns the majority of the property there has contacted CCDC and is interested in trying to figure out how they can catch up and do development at the same time and take advantage of the tax increment and CCDC participation. So this part, I'm thinking that we might have more information for you in August, although I did hear one comment saying having parking here could be a benefit for the wider festival area. Moving on to the next block that has the CW Moore Park as well as the apartments. The apartments currently have the on-street parking. Our understanding is that the visitors do use that area. We would not be anticipating really a market use there or a cafe use. We do have some visuals showing if we did have wider parking here at the park, how that could enhance the connection of the festival area to the park. So that area could have parking or could not have parking to augment the park. On the opposite side of the street is where we've talked about having those existing Norway maples. It is currently the parking lot for the CW Moore office building. We do anticipate this redeveloping. We don't know what the land uses on the ground floor will be at that time. One opportunity is that the new development could, if they wanted cafe space, that doesn't all have to take place within the right of way. So there could be some design considerations for that side of the street. Moving on to the final block here with from 4th to 3rd at the Idaho Department of Labor. We do anticipate this redeveloping, but they have not indicated anything in the near term. And we understand that they are submitting a letter that they are interested in maintaining on-street parking in their area. And then on the south side, we have both the existing residential part here that has the trees that will be maintained, and then the parking lot. We do anticipate this part redeveloping. Again, we don't know what those land uses will be on the ground floor, if they specifically would need cafe retail space or not. Mhm. Here.
The parking structure, the public parking
Within,
is a land use in that area.
so to the south, on Grove Street between 5th and 6th, that there is a parking structure here with the hotel with 200 public parking spaces in it. So just want to touch on the functionality. So going back to the one Festival Street on the Broad Street, right now that's Boise Brewing, Wilder, Form and Function. Our parking services are having a lot of non-compliance on that street right now. It does not have an alley. So the beer truck, the food delivery, everything, even people popping in to get a cup of coffee, we are seeing non-compliance there. So, what do you do with that? Do you live with the non-compliance because we want a narrower street, or do we try to look at the public right of way and figure out, well, does that mean that we would be better off providing parking delivery, at least on one side of the street, or a parking pocket? How much is adequate is part of what we wanted to get to in these. So, in general, we're seeing a lot of demand for the curb space. Besides the truck and beverage deliveries, Restaurant places are increasingly wanting a space where they can have, the delivery services or people come to pick up meals to go. Of course, there's always the package deliveries, ride hailing. We're seeing much more of that they actually want a space to drop people up or off or pick them up. And as we stated down here in this southeast quadrant, I wrote southwest in the report, ignore that. There is not an alley over here, so that always complicates things. We are hoping that we could get some of our deliveries in the alleys that do exist on the north side and at least for 2 of the blocks on the south side. So we've gone through the known land uses, the future land uses, and like I said, the big trade-off here is just the wider patio market, just pedestrian area in general versus the symmetrical street. And if we want, what we would see is a more functional street with that parking loading. I do want to just make one comment on the cross section that shows one way from the furniture zone. It's showing an 8-foot pedestrian area, which is wonderful. This is what, having that balance and a dedicated space for pedestrians outside of the cafe area is really important. It's shown in the cross sections. We don't currently have a policy or a way of protecting that 8 feet. Right now, we allow our patio cafe areas to come within the minimum 4 feet of ADA that could go to the trunk of the tree. So this is another thing that we need to figure out. I mean, we really want that 8 feet of pedestrian area, but legally we need a policy to come through with this that would support that. Okay. So just closing this out on the items, so the water feature. So why a water feature? Ellen touched on some of that and the great feedback that they got from the public. It does provide that sense of place for the city canal. People love the water feature. We just want to make sure council's really making a conscious decision and understanding that, notoriously high maintenance. And we do have a current water feature at CW Moore Park. Obviously, this enhances that and adds to it. So we just want to put that in front of council to see if Parks has said they will maintain it. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're taking in the benefit of their efforts and the funding that it takes and the public benefit. So we were just looking to see if council has any feedback on that item.
Madam Mayor, quickly on the water feature, I would say yes, if we can, I'd like to see the costs on maintaining it, but more importantly, I don't want to see any more architect designed water features. If we're going to do a water feature, let's have an artist contest and get one that has a real benefit in addition to the water that creates that public art.
Madam Mayor, on the water feature, Karen, I'm wondering, because the one at CW Moore Park is cool, it's also a little bit dangerous. It seems like people hurt themselves on it sometimes.
Do you mean cool as in temperature or
Cool as in like,
awesome?
it's historic and, it has that water wheel and stuff. Sometimes people hurt themselves on it. Is there a way to make that improve that water feature so it's a little bit more interactive and safer? And, kind of incorporating that into the general interactivity of this block instead of adding a second water feature to our kind of dangerous, cool water feature?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Woodings, thanks for that question. So it's not part of this specific streetscape design project, but as part of the conversations around it, there have been spin-off conversations with Parks and Rec about how could, and this is in kind of that vision report, how could that park be redesigned mildly, I would say, to better interact with the street? Because Brian, who spoke earlier, worked on the original design of that park at the time. The idea, I think, was to kind of isolate the park a little bit from Grove Street and have it face Fifth. I think it's on Fifth. But now that things are changing, the idea is to kind of open that up, remove the berm, re-examine, and he's been actively talking with Parks and Recreation about how that could work. So I think that's a long way of saying yes. And just while I'm at it, the rendering here is kind of purposefully not very exciting, with the intent that it would be designed, I think, through a separate process, as you were mentioning, Council President Clegg, because, and so that's one of the recommendations that came out of the vision report, is to the extent possible, continue to incorporate like a historian, artist, work with arts and history, and really have these interpretive elements coming out of the community. And I'll indulge a little bit just to say, I was able personally, and many others, to have conversations with people I think that aren't typically consulted, and hear from like third, fourth generation, like Chinese immigrants, you know, a lot of conversations with the Bass Block and other more kind of recent immigrants to Boise, and ask, you know, who are starting to engage in the conversation around what this block looks like, which is kind of exciting. So thank you.
And I'm going to have to ask us to wrap up on this one, but what I'd ask of staff is, there's obviously more conversation that needs to be had. These are, it's clear there's a lot of interest in this. We have questions. Would you please take, and we need to look at this too, but we're going to go way over and something will get bumped. So will you please take the feedback that you've gotten so far today, the conversation that we just had and what you could glean from that, and then let's get you scheduled for after the council recess to come back again.
Great. Yeah. I mean, the one item that we will be talking about are parking pockets versus a full block or close to a full block of parking, just for that functionality. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, my sense is, and then we got to move on.
Yep.
Because given the conversation that we had on this, what was it, just a couple of weeks ago, and the interest in more parking, it's going to be longer than we can, and we're 10 minutes over. Sorry about that.
Madam Mayor, can I just I'll make it quick.
If it's a question, I'd rather you send it and they can get to you. If it's a statement, sure, but
It's absolutely a statement. The list of the different nationalities that you're looking at, could you please also look at the Mexican community? It's one that I think has been greatly omitted. Thank you, Mayor.
thanks. Okay, thank you both. Appreciate it. And Brooke Green, welcome.
I'm going to skip an introduction and just let Brooke give her presentation.
All right, well, good afternoon. I'm a privileged, can you guys hear me? It's a privilege to be in front of you, and I promise I'm going to be pretty darn brief, as I recognize we're very short on time. You still can't hear me? Is this better? I can shrink. So good afternoon, Brooke Green, Senior Transportation Planner with Ada County Highway District. I'm here before you to give you an update on our Collister Drive concept study. Today's meeting, like I mentioned, is going to be brief, but however, I'm going to just give you an update of where we're at with our outreach efforts and what you can anticipate in the coming months. And don't worry, we will be back before you as we bring the concepts to fruition. Collister Drive is the area in which we're looking at. The boundaries are no further north than Hill Road, no further south than State Street. The intersection at Hill Road and Collister is not included within this project. However, we do recognize that we're going to receive several comments, a lot of feedback regarding that intersection, in particular because of the attractors that are north to that, which being the trails. So with that being said, it doesn't mean that we're not necessarily going to take those into consideration, but when we move forward to examine the intersection there at Hill Road and Collister, we will fold those comments into that. The project itself, this is not the first time we've been out there, and I'm going to go a little bit into the history of why it is we're here again today. The project boundaries being what they are in front, we are not going to go any further south than the intersection at State Street. We had completed that intersection in previous years. Although there are some connections there at that location that are certainly important, seeing that anything south of that, people want to access the Greenbelt. Collister has 2 lanes. It is a residential collector, 11-foot travel lanes. It's got a mix of sidewalks and sidewalk width throughout the whole corridor, parking on both sides. The shoulders are anywhere from one location from 4 to 20 feet. So in certain areas throughout this project, we do recognize we have a lot more space to work with. And then in other areas, we recognize we have very little space to work with. We are being very upfront as we go forward with this project, is we are doing everything we possibly can, certainly to stay within the footprint. Although we recognize that can't always be possible, we are trying our best to mimic our efforts with Kootenai Street. We completed Kootenai, and I was before you a couple years ago regarding Kootenai Street, where we were able to stay within the existing footprint while at the same time providing for all of the desires the neighborhood asked of us. This posted speed limit is 30 miles per hour. There is transit facilities along this with several bus stops, and we are taking that into consideration. The project timeline, we've got this past May, we went out, we did our initial outreach with our stakeholders. It is so very important that everything we do moving forward with Collister, because of the history, that we are upfront, very transparent, and very engaging. And why I bring that up is part of our efforts, especially as it pertains to the stakeholders in our meetings, we've already met with the executive team from the Collister Neighborhood Association. We met with the business owners. We met with the school authorities. Really what we're trying to do is engage with them up front. As we moved forward to PIM number 1, which is our public information meeting, that took place in the month of June. Prior to that, we did send out notices a 1.5 mile radius from Collister. We did walk up and down that street handing out door hangers for everyone. And in addition, following the open house, we sent out notices to everybody who we notice did not participate or sign in at our open house. So if you participate in our virtual open house, if I cross-referenced your name and didn't find it on property owners, I sent you a little letter that said, by the way, we're coming to your neighborhood. And there is history with Collister, and that is why we're doing everything we possibly can in this effort to engage with the public. I will be back before the public again in an open house in October. In spring, we will host a 3rd open house once I return, and we anticipate summer adoption of 2022. We had 2 project purposes going into this. Like I mentioned, it's facilitating that really robust public outreach. We really wanted to identify the vision for the neighborhood for possible pedestrian enhancements. Take note, we have no preconceived notion of what we want Collister to look like. We have no sketches drawn up. It really was going to the neighborhood, engaging with them and saying, what is your vision for your neighborhood? Engage with us and help us identify that vision and your goals. And so that's why with this open house and this Collister efforts, why we have 3 open houses. Typically we only have 2. We've thrown in a 3rd one because we saw a lot of success with our engagement on Kootenai, that if we keep going out to the public and we keep engaging, hopefully we're going to get it right. The second purpose is prepare a concept study for Collister Drive that takes into account all of the different variables along it, the needs, and that is in alignment, like I mentioned, with that neighborhood vision. Project goals is improve corridor functionality for all users, including increased ADA compliance, multimodal facilities, a concept study that supports our already adopted Northwest Neighborhood Bike and Pedestrian Plan. In addition to that, our already adopted 2018 Roadways to Bikeways Addendum. Again, it is to produce a concept study that acknowledges and reflects ideas and concerns gathered through our outreach and acknowledges the vision the neighborhood has in place for itself. Back to the history and why this is so important. So back in 2011, before my time, ACHD approached Collister Drive primarily about putting in sidewalks. At that time, they came in with their already existing rendering, put it out to the public. Of course, the neighbors along that corridor recognize that a lot of that is their right of way, right? It's their perceived space, it's their front yard. And as a result, a significant amount of pushback. People who are saying, you know, you're taking away my space, you're taking away my land. In addition to that, we're bringing cars closer to their homes. You're not really solving the problem of speed. You're not really giving us adequate pedestrian facilities. You're doing what you want us to do rather than what the vision of the neighborhood is. And so with that being said, we tabled the project because the concerns were certainly significant, and we let it sit there for about 10 years. In that 10-year time, I conducted the Northwest Neighborhood and Bike Pedestrian Plan in 2015, where we received a significant number of comments that said, Collister needs to be enhanced. We need to put bike and pedestrian facilities in there. We need to make it safe. There's lots of traffic, lots of speeds. So those 37 comments certainly was the catalyst behind a lot of why we're coming back out there. But also we actually started to receive comments, one from the city of Boise, who prioritized this as a location. They'd like to see some pedestrian enhancements. In addition to that, to the school district. 2019, we were back out there. We were completing the State Street Collister Drive intersection. And again, the desire to see some enhanced pedestrian facilities, bike facilities in Collister arose once more. You see the comment there, but it really reiterates that the neighborhood wants to see enhancements, safe enhancements for children walking to school, people who are recreating along that corridor, but more importantly, being able to traverse that corridor safely. We conducted our open house, and like I mentioned, we were very upfront that we do not have a preconceived notion. This open house was really about just engaging with the neighborhood to see if we've got it right, getting them to the table, helping us identify what their vision is for their neighborhood and how we can enhance that. So you're going to see right here in the presentation, majority of those, we got 16% on here who are residents, 22 of them who bike. You know, they're using Collister in so many different ways. I highlighted earlier, there are attractors on both sides. To the north, we've got the trails. To the south, we've got the greenbelt. You have your public library. So we recognize people are getting out and about. And while I was out there doing some initial stakeholder engagement, I noticed several people who were courageous enough to walk along those wide shoulders with their children in tow. And I will certainly say that, it is scary, right? That you've got this location that may not necessarily have enhanced facilities right now. What can we do to enhance in the future? And so by engaging with everybody, finding out why they're using, how they're using it, where they reside, is certainly important to us. I don't know when to go into depth there, but certainly you guys can see how it is people use this space, if they reside on it, and how they're commuting back and forth. But biking and walking, taking the bus, of course, would be walking to the bus stops, walking to school, visiting the library. They're using this, and they're using it oftentimes on feet or on their bike. Simple question, yes or no? So when we were out there in 2011, a lot of people were vehemently against putting any type of enhancements on there. So we really came in with the open question. Does it need improvement? And clearly you can see of the folks who participated, 87 of them are like, yes, please give us something, give us a safe place. And if you were on that virtual town hall or that virtual open house, you heard things such as, I want to be able to send my kids comfortably to the park. I want to be comfortable enough that my child can ride up and down that street. There's people who are speeding in this corridor. What can we do to, slow them down? So we are hearing a number of issues and why they want to see improvements along this stretch. What is your vision for
Brooke,
policy?
I've got to ask you to
Sure.
kind of give us top lines. I'm sorry. I'm not sure if staff told you it was 10 minutes and we went over by 5 on the last one, but we're really pressing up against our end.
Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna quickly go through this. Just what is your vision? Couple things, tree canopy, bikes, as well as pedestrian facilities.
Okay.
So jumping along, you're gonna see where the focus is. It really is in the center where its speeds are much greater. What you wanna see, back to that point, what doesn't fit, more speed bumps or no speed bumps, stoplights, increased speed limits. That kind of runs it up in a nutshell. I'll stand for questions. Again, I'll be back in here as we get closer to October, but in addition to that, when I return next spring.
Great, thanks.
Any questions?
Madam Mayor, thank you so much, Brooke. I just want to note, as I often note in transportation related presentations, that this reminds me so much of the Transportation Action Plan that everyone worked so hard together to develop. And so I'm really excited to see what these streetscapes end up looking like, because I think there's already a huge body of work that supports exactly what the folks on Collister are asking for. So I know that you played a part in that, and I know that city staff played a part in that. So thank you for engaging people and, it feels like this really goes toward the plan and shows that the plan is actually what people want in their neighborhoods. So thank you.
Thank you.
One more.
Madam Mayor, just real quickly, Brooke, I just want to clarify the plans. I'll say we're going to have bike lanes and sidewalks. You said you're going to ask the neighborhood if they want them. So that doesn't jive. If we plan for something, we've got to figure out a way to build it. Isn't it asking them how they want it to get built?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Council President Clegg. We are engaging with them to identify what type of facilities are of interest. Certainly what we heard from them, bikes and pedestrian facilities has risen to the top. Now, we don't want to necessarily go in there and say sidewalks is our only option. There are several tools, our toolbox.
Sure, it doesn't have to be curb and sidewalk, but,
Yep.
but walking and biking facilities are called for in our plans, right?
That is what we hear, and that is what we're trying to engage with them to find out what those bike facilities and what those pedestrian facilities are. We don't want the current application, the standard approach. Cooney was a very good example of us engaging with them to find out what fits.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Brooke. I really appreciate it. It was great to see you. I'm sorry it was so short.
I completely understand.
And thank you for your work on this.
Sure thing. I'll be back.
Okay, moving right along. Karen, you've got just probably 10, 12 minutes to do highlights of this next item.
Mayor, that's perfect. I can actually condense it down to 4 slides. Okay.
Great.
So we did, Matt Edmond
Yeah,
did come before you as part of the State Street last month, and we said we'd come back with it. I'm
I
filling in.
can't believe it's been a month. It feels
Yep.
like it was just last week that we talked about all these things.
Well, it might be a little less than a month, but at least 3 weeks. So I'm filling in for Matt tonight.
Oh, yeah. 'cause he's on
And
vacation.
so I just want to make sure we want to get any of your issues or concerns before the plan is finalized. It's heading on, the timeframe for this is to go before the CCDC board for action August 9th. And then it would come back for compliance with the comprehensive plan to planning and zoning and then council in October. So that then this, should everything go forward and get approved, it would be done and to the taxing agencies by the end of the year. So that's the plan. If any of you have comments that we don't get to tonight, you can get them to me by the end of the week because these are still, the text is still being refined and some of the visuals are still being refined. But I mean, for the most part, what you saw before, all of that is still going forward. We've got 2 documents, the State Street Framework Plan. It's a separate document from the legal State Street Urban Renewal Plan. This is the one that has more of the visuals. It really kind of gives you kind of the strategy and more of a working document that just supports it and gives you all of the connecting details. The big thing I wanted to talk about today is just the financial update because we didn't have those numbers at the last meeting. Why our urban renewal? I think most of you know that the corridor framework, you've already seen those table. This is the legal plan. The State Street plan and objectives, everything we're doing is to achieve the compact mixed use, mixed income development that's supportive of and supported by transit and other alternative transportation. This fits every one of the mayor's 4 strategic initiatives. We've got 8 items legally that it has to comply with, but let's just move on to the economic feasibility. So they took the updated figures, they've compared it to our peer communities. And so what we're seeing is just over the next few years, still a really high escalation in median housing prices, 20%. This will be until we kind of catch up to our peer cities. And then we'll level off, not level off, but a slower growth rate of 2%. This is a graph that shows that the orange is the levy rate. Down here on the bottom is the assessed value and the taxable dollars. What this boils down to is 15 million additional dollars that we had a whole unfunded. We had funded list of projects, and then we had an unfunded list in case the district did capture more funding. Now we already know we're projecting 15 more dollars, so more of the unfunded projects would come off and become funded. So we've got interagency coordination, and then we've got some timing with the district. We would recommend that it go forward now. ACHD has projects going forward. We are looking at transit improvements through different avenues of funding with BRT. With this funding, we could take care of some local match. We can add some features to some ACHD projects. We can capture existing development and work out some more access management, local roads. And then, of course, work with ITD when they get ready for their relocation / disposition. So this was the timeframe that I talked about in the beginning, and that would be my quick overview. I don't know if you have any comments now or if you just want to get back to me.
Well, you did that quickly, so we've got 5 minutes for comments, questions.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, just one real quick question. As I remember reading the framework plan and the URD plan, some of those unfunded priorities include some of the housing. So if there is more money available, it will, as I remember, it would be more money available for housing. And as that is our real, crisis at the moment, I'd like to make sure that CCDC understands that that's a priority.
Great.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you, Karen. And just to piggyback on the Council President Clegg, we brought it up at one of the previous meetings, our concerns about people who are already in low-income housing and who would be potentially displaced with this, and asking that there be some innovation in how do we do right by those folks. Just want to reemphasize that.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, Council Member. One of the interagency initiatives does throw kind of a wide net at least capturing relocation costs, should we be put in that position. Otherwise, we don't really, I think we can be creative if the district, if CCDC money is involved, if it's private, we're a little more limited, but we will try to work with them to either help ease or maintain, that it's all just fluctuating depending on, I think, who's in the driver's seat.
Great, thank you. And again, just for those to be true costs, because it's not sustainable that poor people have to go to social media to do GoFundMe to move their mobile home to another park. So
Council
just want to
member,
emphasize that.
this is the conversation we had. Council can bring and ought to have a discussion with policies that would look at, the tools that you can, you as a council member, that the council could bring to the table side by side with the CCDC piece. So I believe that that's rightfully before the council to kind of brainstorm on and consider.
Great, thank you very much.
Great, thank you. All right. Jennifer's up. I checked in with Jennifer and I'd want to just tee this off. As everybody saw last week or last night or yesterday, we received the initial call from the broker that the opinion would be higher than the appraised value that we had from before. So we wanted to make clear that a trade's off the table. But as we've said all along, housing is our priority. We're looking at all the tools that we have for the benefit of Boise residents. I've asked Jennifer to give an update on where we're at, to get feedback from council on next steps. And I want to be clear in that next steps isn't running to auction. There seems to be a misunderstanding that that's the next step. We are having a conversation right now and we'll be meeting with the neighborhood leaders this week. And we'll continue to have a conversation about the best ways to get at the thing that Boiseans need most right now, and that is affordable housing. And so the next steps Jennifer will present, and I hope that with the dates, it'll be a little bit more clear that there's quite a bit that has to be discussed, explored, and then worked on before proceeding.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. Just a pretty quick overview this evening. I just have 2 slides. As background, since our last meeting, I did go ahead and order 2 brokers' opinions of value on the property. So I have one that has come back, one that is still pending. As part of the evaluation of the potential value of the land, we did discuss looking at it, assuming that it would accommodate some density on the site up to about 8 units per acre. So with those 2 key assumptions, one that the property is annexed and 2 that we are looking at residential development on the site, we are looking, at least according to the first broker, at a value of between $32 and $38 million for the parcel.
So this is a good bit different than what the school district saw from their auction process. And that's largely because of the size of the parcel. So the larger it is, I don't want to say the less valuable it is, but the cost would go down on a per acre basis. And then I hope to have the next broker's opinion probably by early next week. So just a couple of things that are going to be going on kind of in the background. Legal is currently looking at contracting with outside counsel who has expertise in FAA regulations to confirm that we're taking the appropriate steps when we look at the airport agreement with the both the covenants that are on the parcel and the way that we lay out any kind of reimbursement to the airport for the property. Like I said, the second broker's opinion should be back next week. Our annexation and map amendment are still currently scheduled for August 9th before the Planning and Zoning Commission. So I wanted to confirm that direction with you today. And then we tentatively have time on the August 17th work session to go over covenants, removal, kind of what we've found as we go through a little bit more background research on the steps necessary to do anything with the parcel. And what you guys would be looking at as far as next steps potentially in the surplus hearing. So with that, I would stand for questions.
Madam Mayor.
Yeah.
Jennifer, could you go back to that first slide maybe? Okay, so just trying to make sure that I understand. So when we are looking at the broker's opinion is if there were 8 units per acre, if that's how the whole piece of property was developed.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, it's just a kind of a high level range that we were looking at. So what we were requesting in our map amendment on the land use map was that compact land use designation, and 8 dwelling units per acre is generally a transit supportive density. So that's really what we're looking at when we're looking at new development patterns in the city. So it's a range, so that would be anywhere from our R1C zoning probably to like a PUD or potentially like some R2 zoning in there.
And Madam Mayor, just a follow-up to that question. So when we're getting that opinion, if it had more density than that, if it had less density in that maybe a portion of it had a certain amount of density here and a portion had a certain amount there, is that really going to change the value of that property, or does it still kind of stay in that same range just because that's what it has the ability to be?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, it would probably end up staying in the same range. A lot of times when we look at larger developments, density will be located like in one specific area, and then you can do like some lower density stuff on the rest of the parcel. So it's all, I don't want to say it's a wash, but it's spread out across the whole parcel, I think is probably what the assumption was.
Wonderful. And then just the last follow-up. So in my head, then that could potentially look like a very dense area in one portion of it and a very not dense or open space in another, or it also could look like 8 units per acre across the entire thing. Both of those would have the same value.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, generally what we're seeing in the market right now is mixed use and higher density product is more valuable. So the school district's property went for $800,000 an acre, and they were looking at a density of about 20 dwelling units per acre. So where we see multifamily, that's generally a higher value. But on the flip side, at the other end of the spectrum, open space is obviously much less value. So in theory, it would probably be spread across it, but there would be sections that would be of higher value in the event that we are looking at some sort of mixed use development on the site.
Great. Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you. One clarification question, Jennifer, the payback piece to the airport. Can you explain that again to me? I think I missed
Madam
it.
Mayor, Councilmember Thompson, as part of the background research that we have been doing on, when we had the potential land trade as an option in front of us, one of the actions that the city would have to take is to remove the restrictive covenant that's on the parcel. As part of that, and as part of that kind of making the airport whole, we don't have a firm enough understanding of how the FAA views calculating that amount. So the parks purchased it from the airport for like $655,000, down from its original $1.275 million in value when the airport purchased it from the family. And so the deflation in value was largely because of the covenants. And so any change to the covenants would require us to go back to the airport. But what we're trying to work through right now is whether that's based on today's market value, if that's calculated using a consumer price index inflationary measure, or if just kind of what the whole range of options are as far as that's concerned. So.
Madam Mayor. Thanks, Jennifer. So the next slide, I think, kind of had an outline of the next steps that we might consider. If we go forward with the August 9th Planning and Zoning Commission hearing on annexation and land use map amendment, Planning and Zoning only makes recommendations on annexation. So what that hearing would do would identify what people care about around the annexation, essentially, right?
Madam Mayor, Council
To me,
President, that's
it
correct.
looks like a really positive step so that we can get some input on some of that. The August 17th work session, I think for me at this point, I'd like to understand what all of our options are and what all of the goals that we have as a city are and how we can think about those and also think about the things that we're hearing from the community that are their goals. And so, whatever, I don't know what the right process is on August 17th or the right action on August 17th, but I guess those are the things I'd like to see come forward then so that we can begin figuring out, what is the future, not of just of this piece of land, but of that area of town.
Madam Mayor, Council President Clegg, just so I'm clear, so would you be looking for staff to provide some just potential options as far as like, if we land bank it, if we look at like some sort of, I don't know, like splitting the difference, so bringing back 80 acres for development and, maybe the other 80 for open space. Is that the kind of thing that you're looking for?
I would tell you I'm not sure exactly. I guess what I would like to maybe talk about and think about is what are the things that we would only go forward with housing here? What are the goals that we're trying to accomplish if we go forward with housing here? And what are the ways that we might do that and still have a conversation with the community?
So Jennifer, I'll jump in here. I think what my sense is what we want is like an actual working work session where, yes, some guidance, like we need. So if the council president is asking for options, I would say, let's think in the interim about how we organize that meeting in such a way that we're clear on the things that we need to consider in this process, but then create a way for council to weigh in on what's important. And particularly as the council president said, on making sure that we achieve the affordability goals that we all have here. And so then what are the tools necessary to do that we can then take into account in conversations with the community and the next steps?
And what would be a process forward to get us to the best conversation?
Madam Mayor. And so just to be clear, Jennifer, that August 9th Planning and Zoning Commission hearing, this is a place where any member of the public would be able to share their concerns or questions, that's what fully participate.
Madam Mayor, Council Member Sanchez, that's correct. So each person who testifies does have 3 minutes. Neighborhood associations have 20. But they would be speaking specifically to the annexation application and the land use map amendment. And again, that proposal is to change the comprehensive plan land use map from open space to compact at this point.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And on that note, just as a point of clarification, the compact designation does not preclude parks and open space. It's something that's considered as almost a secondary use when we are looking at the land use map. So it's not an either or type proposition.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a quick follow-up. And I don't know who to address this to, maybe it's to you, Jennifer, but just because we have our own internal language and not everybody knows what compact and all that stuff means. Is there a way we can do some community engagement, put something on our website or social media to really define that so that folks don't get frustrated if they choose to participate in this and they know what the parameters are, so that when they're speaking, they stick to the facts and the whole purpose of this. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, if there's not another question, I got one more or a couple more. You brought this up and I just want to make sure that I kind of heard it correctly. There was still another step of having to remove the covenants. And I don't see that up there, but I did hear you say it took place in a step earlier. And I just wanted to get some clarity of when.
Madam Mayor, Council President Councilmember Halliburton, those have not been removed. We are still working through kind of what our requirements are with the FAA as we go to remove those. Originally, we had those scheduled for tonight for you guys to remove as part of a resolution. Those will come, if we do move forward, those will come back before you as a resolution for you guys to approve. And so then those would go in and be recorded.
And Madam Mayor, so the question is, does that fit into anywhere into the middle of this timeline, or is this kind of after these steps when we would be evaluating those covenants, whether they would be removed, altered, updated, additional covenants would be recommended by council members to exist? Does that take place after August 17th, or would that maybe be somewhere in the middle?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Halliburton, I was operating under the assumption that we would kind of discuss that in the work session on the 17th. And we could get some direction on how you would like to proceed with those.
Great. Yep. So it sounds like there's some time.
Anything else for Jennifer? All right. Thank you.